Hi, Stephanie. Good morning.
Hi, how are you doing, Sarah?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Happy Friday. Happy International Women's Day.
Happy International Women's Day to us and everyone that's gone before us and those that will go after us. And
That's right.
man,
Yeah,
it's there's still so much to do, and despite us sometimes going backwards, there's still a lot to celebrate. So
absolutely. I agree. I feel like it's every time it gets to this year, it's always like, oh, there's still so much to do, but look at this. We're doing it. It's
but
happening.
we've
It's
accomplished a
taking us a
lot.
little while, but it's pretty good.
Totally.
Progress.
Um, Well, before we get into introductions, I'll give everyone a few more minutes to join. So for those of you that are already on the line with us, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor for us to have Stephanie join us. I am going to launch a poll. If you guys will answer this one question, we just love to know who's on the line in case we need to tailor the conversation to anything more specific. So let us know who not necessarily who you are, but where you are in your parenting journey. Are you expecting your first baby, your second or third, and so on? Okay, so 100% so far, Stephanie, are expecting their first baby.
Cool. That's great.
Amazing. The other thing I want to mention is there isn't really a chat bar for those of us that are joining. So in the question section, if you guys will let us know where you are dialed in from, we always sort of just love to know where everyone's located. So we'll just keep the poll open for like another minute or two, and then we'll get started. Let's see. Yeah, still 100% expecting their first baby. I didn't take the poll, but I have two kids. Amelia is almost 5 and Zoe is almost 2. So how old are your kids, Stephanie?
My boys are 9 and 5.
So 2 boys.
2 boys, 9 and 5.
Nice. Okay, so everyone is still 100% expecting their first baby. Okay, so we're 2 minutes in. I'm located in Austin, Texas. Stephanie, do you want to let everyone know where you're located?
Yeah, sure. I'm in Connecticut, just north of New York City, and it's a sunny day here.
Cool. Okay, so we have 100% participation of people expecting their first baby. So if we need to tailor parts of the conversation around that, we certainly can. All right, please. Oh, someone from Oakland, someone from Encinitas, someone from Napa. Oh, I want to go to Napa. Amazing. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. All right, let's get started. Okay, so for those of you that don't know, I'm Sarah. I'm the founder of Populous. It's a simplified baby registry platform and mom of 2, like I just mentioned, to 2 girls. Zoe is almost 2, Amelia is almost 5. And outside of the registry business, it was so important for me to create some type of content, basically information that I wish I had access to when I was pregnant with both of my kids. And that is where the idea for solicited advice came from, which I'm sure all of you on the line can appreciate the title for that content series, because when you are expecting a baby, you are inundated with unsolicited advice. So that's sort of like the take on the title of this webinar series. And I went through a maternity leave and a transition back to corporate from maternity leave before COVID, which was extremely hard because I don't have a single parent friend that can relate to, at this time, going into an office, commuting, pumping, all the beautiful things that come with going back into a physical office, because 6 months after I did that, COVID happened and everything has sort of shifted. With that being said, Stephanie, if you will introduce yourself. Again, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor, and I can't wait to have this discussion with you.
Of course, such a pleasure. And thank you, Sarah, for everything you've created with Populist. I think it's incredible to have the resources and the combo of the two. There's the things we need and there's what we need to hear, and exactly as you said, what we don't need to hear. And so that's really been an important delineation that I've really appreciated in kind of my different ways. I'll introduce myself. So Stephanie Kramer, I have 2 young sons, so I'm a mom of 2 young boys. Had my own challenges in the road to motherhood, and recently in the past year wrote a book called Carry Strong, an empowered approach to navigating pregnancy and work, that talks about all the different ways we become a parent through it, with the voices of so many women across the US in a lot of different roles. So corporate jobs like mine, but also entrepreneurs, incredible healthcare providers, teachers, and individuals who have decided also that their work is done in the home and not necessarily in a role. And I think it's really important we start to erase some of these lines and we support each other as women. I also am the CHRO, so the head of HR for L'Oreal USA. So that is my day job. And I'm really thrilled to have this conversation with all of you here today.
Likewise. So I have gone through the notes copiously. I've, tried my best to finish the book before this webinar started, but I feel like there are so many places where we can start this discussion. But what I'm really curious about, and someone actually messaged us on Instagram, is what was your inspiration for the book? Was there anything specific to your experience with leave that really inspired this, or things you've seen in your own personal career? So what inspired you to write the book?
So, well, thank you for the question. It really was threefold. One is that I had, as I mentioned, my own challenges. So and all of you that are listening will understand, especially if you're with your first baby, I was pregnant, unpregnant, pregnant, unpregnant, pregnant at work. And that I never expected. I think I always wanted to be two things. I really wanted to be an executive and I really wanted to be a mom. So all of a sudden it was like that wasn't possible and it really rocked me. And then it was the same as it was tough to get pregnant with my second son too. And in between those conversations, I realized that I wasn't alone, but I felt so alone. We'd have conversations behind closed doors and, you'd get advice and support. And actually, whether or not you're going to continue to have challenges on your way to becoming a mother, you also don't have to feel that same weight of being alone. So I wanted to write the book because of that, but also I was at a company with paid leave, with supportive people around me, with a partner who was working, and I felt like that. So I knew I needed to do something about it in a much bigger way, especially for those that didn't have that same level of opportunity and privilege. So recognizing that. Then it was COVID. So in the past 4 years, which almost 4 years to the day, which is totally
crazy.
Like so many others, I decided to, take up some hobbies, I guess, and I wrote a proposal for some research to talk about working women and their impact in pregnancy. Started with one study, it snowballed into 4, and I started working on this book because I saw women, and some of them are in the book, and their stories that are in their full PPE, scrubs, bellies out, and they were taking care of all of us. I saw that as an incredible strength and thought, why do we always think of women who are working when they're pregnant as something they have to get through? This is so damn powerful. And so that moment on, I decided, and inspired by the generous stories of so many and the research, by the way, that was very much supportive in what we can find as this opportunity, that I decided to write the book. So it was really those dovetails, and now the momentum has really continued. And my whole goal with the book and with the project is just to create the conversations in the space so that all of us can create, I call them tailwinds, after us, so that we don't have to feel as alone no matter what. There's still going to be challenges, but at least we can feel in a community of support at work and at home.
Thank you. When you were doing the research for your book, was there any data or discovery that you were surprised by? And if so, or if you remember, can you share any of those, wow, I wasn't expecting that type of moment?
I think, there were some hypotheses I had because I had this feeling of a boost of confidence, but I also knew that it wasn't the same always and it would change over time. And then I saw it reflected in the numbers that there was actually women, in hindsight, they really felt the strength and power. I think it's also something you're like, wow, I'm able to do all of this, plus I'm carrying a baby, plus it's something I wanted and I'm having this achievement. But I was surprised how strong those numbers were. Then also, I did do research with men and women and non-gender identifying individuals. And you'll find that, individuals of all genders also are really invested in wanting to become a parent and feel it as an impact to their career. And by the way, it's not necessarily negative. It just exists and it's recognition of that. So that was really important. And then the third thing was a big aha. It was 1 out of 2 women said that the journey to pregnancy, not yet physical pregnancy, was impacting their career. So, often people ask me about leave, or they go to the reveal, how to tell my boss I'm pregnant, in that moment where you're, we all know that feeling.
Yep.
And actually, you could be pregnant at work for 5 years and not have a baby. And so when I talk to people, so people's managers or employers or even individuals, I say, like, realize we have to recognize this is a much longer than a 40-week, 9-month-ish journey. It can be a much longer time period. So I wanted to really extend that. And that insight from the research made me do it much more deliberately than focusing on where you are, when you're already at that point of being pregnant.
Right. I remember being, I was at a tech company before I left to start Populist, and the conversations around pregnancy, when you might become pregnant, just that whole topic it's so sensitive and delicate. And I was a people leader about halfway through my career at that company, and I worked with everyone that reported into me. They were all women. About half were moms, the other half weren't. But it's not like, thinking back to that time, no one ever had a conversation with me about, one, if I was even allowed to approach the topic with the women who worked with me. If I was, what does that look like? Is it just like a blanket statement to my team that says, hey, if or when any of you are going to start trying to have a family, I'm here to support you? It's just so funny looking back, because having a team full of women, no one at my company at the time ever talked to me about the guidelines, how to approach it. If someone did come to me that maybe had miscarried, or they're trying and maybe their IVFs aren't successful, their transfers aren't successful, like I think back about that experience and how ill-equipped I would have been had someone even approached me about that. I think I would have been so scared to have those conversations and not empowered, because I did not have the resources. Has this book and what you've discovered and learned sort of shaped how you might teach and lead people at your own company to have those potential conversations?
Absolutely. And it's really interesting. I think, for women like us, we don't want to have that experience for that the way we experienced it, and we want to be part of the solution. So with the book, it's often, of course, I'm trying to guide the individual who's experiencing it for herself, but also leaders of all genders, and how to encourage that conversation in a way that's important for them. So one thing I talk about in the book, well, first of all, I always say it's a conversation. It's not like, how do you prepare yourself to have this one way, message, right? It's going to be a conversation. And in fact, not just for pregnancy, but for any work-life intersections or just other big, important, and often heavy topics, you need to make sure that you do it in a way that you feel comfortable, and also that you're having a conversation in the way that that other person is going to want to receive it. You can guide them in that way. So for example, I use, we were talking about loss recently, and I was saying, here's five questions for you can think about. Who do you need to tell? Like, do you need to tell someone? Okay, I feel like I need to tell someone. I need a few days, or I'm struggling with this, or I'm going through infertility treatments, etc. Okay, who do you need to tell? Is it your boss? Is it a friend at work? Is it your HR? Is it just your partner? But you want to have the conversation. So it always doesn't have to be delineated by one thing the right way to do. So who is it? Then it's, what do you need to tell them? And for some people, you might feel super comfortable, or let's hope we get to this point eventually, but maybe it's just not your personality to be like, I'm going through morning monitoring, I need to have my blood draws. Maybe it's, I'm going through something personal, I'm not ready to share what that is right now. I just need you to be aware. Okay, so that's two different ways of the same thing, but the result, so that's the who and the what you need to tell. Where do you need to do it immediately? Do you need it to be a quick call? Are you better when you have a one-on-one in person? Especially now, like, is it in a regular meeting? Is it a regular meeting that you're going to have in a few weeks or a few days? Or is it like, I need to talk about this right now with some urgency? And I think if you break it down into these steps, it can feel more, not just natural, but also kind of calibrates how people feel, because it can be really intimidating. And again, for any major thing you're going through. But the last and most important part, so you have who, you have what, you have when, where, which are the last two, and then the why is ultimately you're advocating for yourself. So you're creating self-advocacy. You need to take care of yourself mentally, physically, but also you are also creating a relationship with that person. So as you said, as a people leader, you're also creating trust, and you're creating gravitas, and you're opening the space for those conversations, because maybe it's not going to be about pregnancy or loss. Maybe it's going to be something else that you're creating that opportunity for a more, open conversation. And we know we spend so much time at work, but you're going to handle it in different ways based off of how you feel. But also, wouldn't it be incredible if it's building it for a relationship for the future and ultimately a strength of empathy and leaders that you're going to trust and probably work better with because you have that too.
Yeah, this isn't a question, it's a statement that someone put in the chat, and it says, I would never tell my employer I'm trying to get pregnant.
Mm.
I don't think that person is alone in that statement.
Mm.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there
Yeah.
anything that you would say to someone who feels like that? I mean, you just shared so many wonderful suggestions,
So
but I imagine that's common.
it is, and I will tell you, I'll use myself as an example. So I had both of my pregnancies way too long at work. I
Mhm.
had great bosses in supportive environments. So this is different than what you're expressing, but I'm going to tell you, for me, myself, I was terrified. I had
Mhm.
had multiple losses and I didn't want to be judged, regardless if maybe I was actually going to be or not. I felt like I would. And I was so afraid that I waited until it was so obvious that I was incredibly pregnant. And I think I really could have used a little bit more support, but I was feeling that way in a support environment. So I can imagine how hard it must be for you to feel if you're in the environment where you don't feel supported. So two things. One is consider who else in that environment, so maybe not your boss again, that you can have to be that confidential support you need. You know, you don't have the obligation, but it might be something that could be really helpful. And in fact, might even help you navigate those conversations with those that you don't feel are going to be as supportive. That's number one. Number two, if you feel this way all the time, you need to evaluate where you are. And I
Mhm.
feel like I've been thinking about this a lot personally too, but you know, it's uh, the comfort that you feel in this moment. Sometimes it can be a light bulb that can remind you like, okay, this is certainly not how I want to be as a leader in the future. And that's a huge learning. But also, is that where you want to be as you continue in this next phase of your life? So it gives you kind of both places. What do you need for you right now? And by the way, it might be, I need this stability, I need this role, I need to stay here. This is just not the best boss. Okay, then who else do you have around you? But also use that as a checkpoint. I often tell people to use a traffic light, like, are you green? Are you feeling good? You're supported, you're growing, you're thriving, work feels good. And pregnant women often in that moment get a little scared because
Right.
like, wait, everything's so good. I don't want to mess it up. It's like, no, just take stock of it. And how are you gonna maintain that? Are you yellow? Is there something that's off, something that's making you feel hesitant? Like, do you go, do you stay, or are you red? And for you in this question, really evaluate that. And again, it doesn't have to be immediate and you need that stability, but it also might be a sign that it's all right, maybe this is having a bigger effect on you that you don't want to have linger.
Right. Yeah, I similar, definitely waited too long to tell my boss I was pregnant, which is silly because she was a mom. There was a few direct reports above me, and the one that I reported directly into was a mom, but I was so scared to be a few reasons. I knew that there was like a pending promotion on the line, and I was so afraid that I was going to be overlooked or that someone would think differently, like I wouldn't be able to do it. And or would they want to wait for me to come back? Would they want to wait for someone that they knew was going to be going on leave for 3 months? Did they need to fill the position sooner? I mentioned I worked at a tech company, so it's predominantly men, and I ran like our global trade show team. So I traveled with these people, I ran all hands with these people. I was just so scared and not confident that people would, I did not want to be seen and looked at differently, is basically my point. And I know that that is like a really common feeling, but it's so funny because when I became a mom, I felt like this entirely new sense of like confidence, eventually, empowerment, determination. I became more assertive. So it's just so funny, but I wish I would have had those conversations sooner. Again, just my perspective, because I think we would have been able to plan better together with my bosses.
Yeah.
Because I was just creating hypotheticals in my mind. I was letting these tapes run and I was creating scenarios that weren't true. And
Right.
my experience, thankfully, was a very good, positive, supportive one. But I let that linger way longer than it needed to.
I mean, there's so much power in what you said. It's like the timing and the openness in that conversation that it, for you feels like so much, but I'm sure she probably didn't even realize, right, that this was lingering for you. Maybe it was, or it could be, but might have been a hypothetical also for her. And I had this example recently with someone that I was speaking to outside of my company, and I was saying, like, what are you afraid of? You want to say what, and what do you really want to say? And she's like, I want to know, like, is my maternity leave and this timing holding me back from being promoted? And I said, do you deserve the promotion? And she was like, I think I deserve the promotion. I was like, right now? Do you deserve the promotion right now? And she's like, no, but I think by the end of the year, like, I'm obtaining the goals. And I was like, and are you going to be able to do that in the next 6 months? She's like, no. And I was like, all right, so what conversation do you want to really have? And the discussion was actually, I want to have the conversation that I still would like to be on track for the promotion. I recognize that I haven't achieved yet all of the goals I want to. It's going to take 6 months more than that, but I really would like that to be my track from now until I'm on my leave. And when I come back, I'd like that continued support. And it's a risk, right? Like, that's a manager, that's a project, that's all those things. But actually, it was one of those resets where she was like, maybe actually I don't deserve that yet. And not necessarily in a bad way. And it wasn't because of being pregnant. Now, the fear was obviously a lot of women too, and myself included, were like, but if we push really hard, we can get everything done ahead of time, and then we'll get promoted, and then we'll have a baby. And guess what? Your career is long, and your amount of time that you're going to have small children is short. Right. And I personally remember, and it's a quote that's in the book, and it's from one of my very dear friends, but I remember her holding her baby in her hands, and I was thinking how much that's something I aspire to. And she said, well, what's the problem? And I was like, well, I want to get promoted, and then I want to do this, and then we might move a new apartment. And it was like, you realize you can do that concurrently, number one, which is a huge difference, I think, for women like us. Oh, that's right, it's concurrent. I agree. My career accelerated when I had children. So and several women also reflected that in hindsight because of our skills, because of our priorities, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So that's one, concurrent. And the second is you realize you have, how many more roles are there for you? Like, you've got another, I remember her being like, you have another 30 years to work. It's like, geez. And how many more years are you going to have when you're going to have a baby? Right. And it was really helpful in level setting that. But I think, to your point, the most important one is having that conversation, and frankly, making sure that you're working places where you can, and
right.
And with openness. Yeah,
totally. Okay, so I just want to touch on really quick before we go into like coming back to leave, like before we actually like jump too far ahead. In the book, under like the perspective, so there's 5 principles that you talk about under the perspective one. I love when you suggest when you talk to your employer, asking where the mother's room is instead of if, just using more definitive language and assumptive language, and not, wishy-washy and, oh, if you have this accommodation, can you do, what sort of accommodations should, I mean, I know it's different per state,
yep.
But have you seen accommodations having to shift with people working from home full time versus going into the office? And what are some of those really important questions someone should think about asking their employer if they work from an office or if they're working from home?
Yeah, well, first of all, the principles, so there's perspective, balance, community, communication, and identity, and they all kind of go together with each other. Mm-hmm. And in this perspective, and it's very interesting you picked that quote, because this week, actually, on Wednesday, I was at an event for the person who gave that quote, and it's Abby Donald. She's the founder of a company actually in Texas called Work and Mother. And they put mothers' rooms into office buildings, so big full office buildings. So not just necessarily for kind of one floor, et cetera, but they established these mothers' rooms with everything you need, because there's a huge opportunity for retention if women feel that they have this space when they're going to come back to work. It's like, it's there and it exists. You don't have to do it, but at least you know it exists. And that quote from her, I find so powerful, because you get a very different answer, right? Instead of asking if you have a mother's room, where your mother's room is. And it's what we really need to be, flipping these taboo topics into table stakes. So for me, frankly, in terms of what's offered, you're going to also want to make sure you have visibility to that. So that's the first thing I would say is a consideration. Where can you get the information for you to review? So of course you want to talk to employees that are at a company or an organization, or if you're thinking about doing something on your own, you want to get that information from the people that are living it. But also you want access to what are the benefits so including fertility, including what type of coverage you have medical, including mental health care, access to other resources. during, what do you have for the during space? And then also what do you have after? So, those the mother's rooms, transportation of milk, etc. But also after, are there employee resource groups for parents? Is there caregiver benefits, etc.? And you want to think about it in all three of those ways. But also when you're reviewing and you're thinking about that, think about the resources that you might not need yourself, but you want to see mirrored in the employee population that you have. And that's something I think is really powerful. I remember when I was speaking to someone with the book, and they were talking about, they were an intern, they were considering an internship, and they asked about egg freezing coverage. And they said, wasn't something they needed right now in that moment, but the possibility that it was there, they knew they were not going to have the typical path to motherhood based off of who they were. And in fact, that just existing made them have a different appreciation for the company. And there's a lot of different things that we can talk about that way. But that would be one consideration for me, is like, look at the before, during, and after, but also think about what you might not need for you, but you want to make sure is available to those that are in your community. And it's going to be different based on the type of work,
Right. The after piece is so important because it was something I never thought through when I returned from maternity leave. And shortly after leave, it was my first work trip away. Amelia was 6 months old. I had to fly to Vegas. And I was so ill-equipped for that trip. I didn't put any products on my baby registry for like flying with breast milk. I don't even think I had like the right breast pump. I did not know at the time that like hotel little refrigerators probably aren't cold enough to store your breast milk. So how could I get it home quickly? Going through TSA with breast milk was like a whole other sort of like traumatizing experience. And that trip for me was the first time I thought, I don't know if this is going to work for me. And it was so sad and so eye-opening. And it wasn't because I didn't love my job, but what I had to go through, and that was part of my job. I had to travel. I mean, I traveled globally for work, and that was just like a small glimpse just to Las Vegas from Texas. And I was just like, holy cow, I don't know if I can make this work. And I think that was a really hard realization because my whole life I was just really set on wanting this career and being a mom. But the job specifically that I was in, for me, it just didn't feel suitable. Like I just did not feel like I could actually make both work. My workload didn't change and I went back to work. It wasn't supposed to, that was the job I was given and wanted to do. I thought I could make it work, but when I was really in the middle of it, it wasn't going to work for me. Right. And but I never had those conversations. Can you pay for the mini fridge on my hotel bill? Can you pay for a service for me to ship back my breast milk to my kid? What kind of accommodations can you help make for me on the road when I'm supposed to be setting up customer meetings for our sales guys 12 hours a day? I just did not know, like so many people, what kind of questions to even ask. I just didn't even know what the experience was going to look like. And so I'm so thankful for you for opening up these opportunities for people to have these conversations, because you just don't know what to ask unless you've gone through it. And so again, thank you for sharing everything you know with us, because man, it's freaking hard. It's so hard. And it's really so scary.
And it's funny, everything you describe, I get zoomed back to pouring out milk in the bathroom in the airplane, and you're just like, you're really crying over spilled milk. You're like,
devastated.
This is the saddest thing, but I'm so proud of myself. And then, you go back to your seat and you're like, okay, I've got another, I was flying to Asia. I was like, okay, I've got another 4 hours before I have to cry again, and pour it down. But, and I also had a fire alarm go off in a Paris hotel room, which I know is very glamorous, sounds very glamorous, but just imagine I had to choose if I was going to be embarrassed enough to tell them that I was the one that caused the power outage in the hotel because the adapter wasn't working with the breast pump, or if I was just going to not have power for the next. I just didn't turn on the power. I'd like hope that somebody else figured it out. Now I can tell them. So it's been 9 years. It's just a little traumatic. But those funny things in the moment are so heavy, and it's also a very finite amount of time. So we can support women that finite amount of time. This is a huge point of retention for this longer journey. So for me, the like notion of time and support in these key moments is so powerful. And I think the other thing to help you and give you just advice, especially for those of you who are going through it, do a walkthrough. So, professional athletes often have these like visualizations of the game they're about to do. And I tell people, like, literally do it. Okay, what is it going to look like? Even if your commute is from, your bed to your chair, what is your morning going to look like? What is your day going to look like? Stand up, walk through it physically. Where are the bottles going to be? Where is the bait? Do you have all your stuff? Have you checked Poppy List? Are you using what you need? When you go to work, do you have the extra pieces? How does it actually feel? Is the time crunch really going to work? And same with your trip. Okay, you're not going to actually walk through and go to the airport, but try to actually do the visualization. Take the time to do that. So at least when the unforeseen things happen, the rest of it feels good. And I will tell you, I still do that today, not necessarily for breastfeeding, but I do that when I'm having either a big work moment or I have something else going on personally. I just take a moment and try to take out all the steps and reduce the risk where I can, so that the rest, if something happens, you're not worried about having an adapter. You're worried about the power going out. So
Yeah.
it can happen.
Yeah, that would have been so nice. And you're in HR, so I'm just gonna share this piece of feedback, which I could give to my HR team, God, 6 or 7 years later. That was my first trip. It was a work trip. And looking back, it would have been so nice if someone at work sat down with me and say, okay, Sarah, we know you just got back from leave. You're getting ready for your first trip. Let's print out these TSA guidelines and go over them together.
Yeah.
Do you have what you need at the hotel room that this company is paying for? That would have been such a cool experience. And I don't know if they do that now, but if you are sending new mothers on the road pretty soon after leave, what a cool supportive environment to create for them, to know that, like, hey, we're thinking of you on this trip. Thank you so much for going away from your new baby. Let's make sure you are empowered with the information, to make this successful for you and the company. I didn't have that. And that would have been a really, I think, really powerful thing for them to have supported me with.
It's interesting. I have someone that's on my team who's coming back from maternity leave soon, and it's a reminder that even our most senior people, who, by the way, are in HR and might know these things exist, I need to do that, and I will, and do the check-in with her. I think it's also something I really encourage from all angles. So what do you need to do as an individual employee? So what access do you have that's easily available just to you, but you need to know it exists?
Right.
What is your manager going to help to reinforce? Imagine if that mom who is your boss would have recognized that in, like, I don't know, I always feel we hold each other to even a higher bar. So when I've had a female boss disappoint me, it feels like way worse. But when they, are super supportive, they get it even better. It's like, just happens, I think, when you've lived through it. But so your manager, so your manager, and then also the role of HR. So what are those benefits? And actually, as that teammate, to make sure you're getting the support for but all three of those things together can give you that. But I also am going to check in on her today. So thank you for that reminder.
She'll love it. She'll feel the smallest gestures, when you're huge as a baby, they just go so far, and they just should not be overlooked. Okay. We had so many questions on Instagram about coming back from leave. And, people are like, what should I do? So are there like some specific tips you always share with people coming back from leave? And if so, what are those?
Yes, well, actually, the one that we just talked about with thinking about a trip is the same for coming back from leave. So while you're still pregnant, I want you to think about what it's going to be like to come back from leave. So while you're still in it, and again, it's physical place of work is easier to describe, but you could be an entrepreneur, you could be working from home, very different ways of thinking about it. But actually, fast forward yourself to be thinking what that looks like. What are the logistics? Is your schedule going to be the same? For example, I have a friend of mine that I was giving advice to, and I was like, remember when she's having her second baby? And I was like, remember when you had a tiny baby? That like 9 or even 7 to 10 is like the best time. It depends. But my kids, it was like the best time. And that is when you are rushing to get out the door and you feel awful, right? And it's like, that's the beautiful time. And you know, when you come home at like between 5 and 7 when they are miserable. So basically you have this beautiful time that you miss out on, and then you're gone for the whole day and it's intense. And then you have this beautiful little baby that you're rushing home to, and they're a mess. Wouldn't it be incredible if you could just a couple days a week shift just a tiny bit, so you get to have some of those moments, and for you to have the decrease in that, and just for a certain amount of time, little tiny tweaks. And by the way, same with caregivers or partners or the services that you're looking to use. Think about that and try to find a balance. And by the way, you're going to have to reassess it over and over again. So, you know, just like it might be very different based off of your child, your needs, your health, et cetera, when you come back, then you're projecting, at least you've done that as a first step, and then reassess it. Your first month back at work is going to feel very different than the second, the third, the fourth, 6 months later, a year later. You need to constantly reassess that. Instead of always being hopeful it's going to get better, try to make sure you're establishing what those new baselines are. I thought that was super helpful. Frankly, like when I first came back to work after both of my children, but especially the first one, I was good. The first month I was like, I felt kind of relieved because it was this stability versus what I had just experienced was super tough. But that second month or the third month was really hard. Like the breastfeeding wasn't as easy. I was again doing the travel. I felt further away. I was having some postpartum. Like it wasn't the first couple weeks of the I've got this. And like I planned my outfits. It was much harder after that. And frankly, with your teammates, I think when you first come back, let's hope that they're celebrating you and they're supporting you. But then all of a sudden, it kind of people get back into their regular routine, and you have to remind them. You have to be like, no, I still have a 7-month-old who's not sleeping. But you forget, you go from like, look at my cute tiny baby, and they're like, oh, we're so proud of you, and you've got this, and then all of a sudden you're like, but I still need to get it, and it's still hard. And I found really that first year was tough for me for both kids. And by the way, my health was tricky too. So I think it's really important. Take it piece by piece, project it out, try to anticipate, but also reassess month 1, month 2, etc. And by the way, for you in your example, it's also where you can think about your job. You're going to come back potentially to the same. You might be coming back to something different, or a different team, or a different boss, or a different project. You're going to have to reassess that also for the short term, but also for projecting yourself out into the longer term. So maybe once you find that footing, or if you were already thinking about something new, when that move is going to be important for you.
Yeah. Speaking of coming back to work, I feel like that's the one question people in office environments should not be allowed to ask a pregnant person. Are you coming back to work? It's such an invasive personal question, and no one actually knows that answer.
Right.
Like no person having a baby can actually answer that. Because it could change. They might think one thing, have their baby, and everything changes. There's just so many scenarios. I hated that question so much. I got it so many times at work. Well, do you think you'll come back? It's like, I don't know. I hope so. Like, I can't answer that. Like, I have no idea.
Right. I always say I have the same feeling about people asking if someone's pregnant or if I'm going to have another baby or something. It causes this like visceral reaction. It's like, I normally am like, are you? That's really interesting.
So these webinars always fly by. We have like, 7 minutes left. So for me, I was really fortunate with a 3-month leave. But my postpartum depression and anxiety and some other things did not really start to surface until about 6 months when I came back to work. So in my experience, my depression and anxiety was not immediate. How should companies, this is tough because I didn't recognize it first, my husband did. So if I don't recognize it in myself first, I'm not even sure how anyone could expect a coworker, maybe even a boss, to recognize it. But how should employers or just people you work with think about that if they observe unusual behavior? Or I don't know exactly how to articulate it, but my question is, how should companies think about supporting people who might experience postpartum depression, anxiety after the baby?
And you're right, it's a very important, but also very delicate topic, because it's the recognition of that that can help happen for yourself, but often does happen from those that you're closest to. So partners, but also, by the way, people at work. And I find for me, it's similar to other instances when you recognize that something is affecting someone's mental health, and encouraging them with the resources they have while respecting their privacy and their boundaries. So I find for employers, it's often making sure that they're sharing that resources are available, you know, regardless if people need them or not, but, you know, whether you're utilizing a provider. For us, for example, with Maven, where it's confidential support that you can utilize 24/7. So if someone recognizes that in you at work, or by the way, your partner, that you're able to say, did you know that this resource exists? And you're not saying like something specific, but also if there's that level, I always more am on the health and safety and well-being of the individual that you have to focus on. And additionally, for employers, that they have EAP or they have therapy services available to individuals, regardless if we're talking about postpartum or other mental health, but that it exists. So it has to exist, and then we can talk about it, you know, utilization of it afterwards, or as people who are comfortable to do that, to allow it for others to happen. But it's super important that people are aware that it does happen, and very important for the women to get the care that they need, for sure. You are cut out. And
Are you still there? I cut out.
I can hear you. Yes. Oh, now I can't hear you.
Okay, sorry. My whole computer just froze, and I was like, of course it just did this the last like 2 minutes of our webinar.
We made it through. We made it through so much.
Okay, last question. When someone comes to you and says, I'm pregnant, I'm preparing for my leave, like, what's the one thing you always tell them that you just want them to know? Like, just the piece of advice that someone would get from Stephanie. Like, what do you want to leave them with?
Well, first of all, I remember someone telling me a story about a boss they had that they were really afraid to tell they were pregnant. And their boss said to them, if you are half as good of a mom as you are an employee, that's one lucky kid. And every time I say it, I almost get tears in my eyes. I feel them like in the corners. So for me, whenever someone comes and tells me their news, I am so, I want to tell them that this is their priority, and it's like something to be celebrated. Because frankly, we're told over and over again about, you know, the headlines of pregnancy is a career killer, and how hard it is, and the dire navigation of motherhood, and the caregiving burden, and all of those things are true. It's hard, but guess what? It's also a joy. Like, you don't get this time back. So I often say that as my one piece of advice. One, I tell them, you know, what a lucky kid to get to have you as their mother. But I also tell them you don't get this time back. So take care of yourself, take care of your baby, enjoy it, celebrate it. And you know, you have a very long time to work, and can't wait to see you when you come back.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for everything. This has been one of my very favorite discussions of, I think this is the 16th webinar we've hosted. And like I said, it's just, God, what would my experience have been like had I had access to something like this? So thank you for everything you do, for the support and empowerment you provide for people all over trying to have families. And we're just so grateful for your time. So thank you so much, Stephanie.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for everything you've created with Populist and conversations like this that are so important. This is how we change it. It's going to be women like us that are going to change it. And I very much believe that. And, you know, there were so many before us that broke glass ceilings and pushed down walls and threw down ladders. Like, let's go past that. We can do it. And I very much believe in that. So thank you so much. And happy International Women's Day. And I kind of like this time between International Women's Day and Mother's Day. Like, let's go for it.
Let's do it. Cool. Thank you, Stephanie. Have a great weekend.
Of course. Thank you so much, Sarah.
For being here.
Thank you.